The crash and the stranger, the sky was full of fire. Pieces of metal screamed through the clouds as the ship broke apart. Smoke filled the cockpit, and alarms blared louder than his own thoughts. Jace gripped the controls, teeth clenched, fighting. To steady the spinning wreck, they were going down and fast. He had no choice. The escape pod wouldn't launch. The landing gear was broken. All he could do was aim for the green stretch below and hope it wasn't filled with sharp rocks. The impact was brutal. The ship skidded across the jungle floor, smashing trees and burning leaves. Everything went black. When Jace woke up, everything was quiet. He coughed, the taste of blood in his mouth. Pain screamed through his side. But he was alive. The main cabin had collapsed, crushed like a tin can. He reached for his suit pack and pulled himself out through a shattered side hatch. Bird-like creatures cried out above him, fleeing into the trees. The air smelled sweet and wild. Then he heard it movement from inside the wreck, not human movement, but soft, cautious, and unfamiliar. He reached for the emergency flare blade at his side, eyes scanning the twisted hull, and then he saw her. She crawled out of the wreckage on all fours. Coughing and blinking, her skin was a pale violet color. Glowing slightly in the light, she wasn't human, but she wasn't a threat either. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and confusion. She wore a torn flight suit, and her arms were shaking. For a second, they just stared at each other. Neither moved, neither spoke. Then she collapsed. Jace rushed forward, ignoring the pain in his side. He caught her just before her head hit the ground. Her body was warm and light, and her breathing was shallow. She was alive, but barely. He dragged her away from the burning wreckage. The sun was setting fast, and the jungle didn't look friendly already. Strange sounds echoed from the deeper shadows. Predators, maybe, or worse. Jace pulled out his emergency scanner. It blinked red no signal, no rescue, and no way to call for help. They were stranded. He laid the alien girl gently under a large root canopy, where the air was cooler. Then he tore a piece of his uniform and wrapped it around her arm where she was bleeding. She winced in her sleep, but didn't wake up. He sat beside her, gripping the flare blade. His eyes didn't rest. Scanning the jungle again and again, something was out there. He could feel it, suddenly. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him and whispered something in a soft, musical language. He shook his head. "I don't understand," but she pointed to herself and said a word slowly. "Lyra," he nodded. Jace then pointed to himself. "Jace." She nodded weakly, then passed out again. The night was long. The jungle was alive with movement. Howls and rustling branches. At one point, something sniffed around their shelter. Jace held his breath, blade raised, ready to fight, but the creature moved on, perhaps afraid of the smell of smoke and blood. Morning came with golden light and the hum of insects. Lyra stirred beside him, her skin cold but her eyes clearer. She looked at him with a mix of fear and gratitude. She tried to sit up, but fell back down. Jace shook his head. Not yet. He handed her a small water pouch. From his suit, she sniffed it, then drank slowly, cautiously. Like a wild animal, unsure of trust, he didn't blame her. He looked out into the thick jungle, knowing they couldn't stay there. The ship was useless. The scanners were fried, and predators would be back once the fire faded. They had to move on. Fast, he turned to Lyra. "We walk," he pointed ahead, then helped her up gently. She winced but stood. Just two survivors, no weapons, no food, no backup. One human, one alien, against an entire planet. Into the wild jungle. The jungle was not kind. Every step felt like a fight. Thick roots tried to trip them. Vines grabbed at their arms, and strange flying bugs circled their heads. Jace used his broken knife to clear a path, but the blade was dull. He was tired, hungry, still bleeding from his crash wounds. But he didn't stop. He had to keep going. because Lyra was getting weaker. She followed him in silence, her steps slow and unsteady. Her skin was pale now, almost gray. The crash had hurt her more than she let on. She leaned against trees to rest every few minutes, but never complained, not once. Jace looked back often to check on her. Every time their eyes met, she gave him a small nod that was enough to keep him moving forward. They crossed a shallow stream, the water dark and filled with strange, glowing fish. Lyra bent down and touched the water with her fingers. The fish scattered, glowing trails left behind them. She said something soft in her language, but Jace couldn't understand. He simply watched her and nodded, pretending he did. A loud growl echoed from the trees. Jace froze, pulling Lyra behind him. Something was moving big and fast. Branches cracked above, then silence. Whatever it was watching them. He pointed ahead. "We move." Lyra nodded quickly, her fear clear on her face. They didn't run, but they walked faster, not stopping until their legs screamed. After an hour, they found a giant tree with a hollow trunk. Jace helped Lyra crawl inside while he stood guard. He held the flare blade tight in one hand and a sharpened stick in the other. It wasn't much, but it made him feel less helpless. As the sun dropped behind the trees, darkness filled the jungle. The sounds changed. Night creatures took over, louder and bolder. Jace didn't sleep. He sat at the opening of the hollow tree, eyes wide, ears sharp, every muscle tense. Lyra coughed softly inside, her body trembling. She needed help, real help. He knew they couldn't survive long like this. At sunrise, Jace made a decision. They needed shelter, food, water, and safety. Staying out in the open was a death sentence. He woke Lyra gently and helped her up. She was burning with fever now, but she still tried to walk beside him. They moved deeper into the jungle, hoping to find a cave or something to protect them. Hours passed, the sun burned their backs, and Jace's vision blurred from exhaustion just when he was about to give up. Lyra suddenly pointed ahead and said one word, "Home." Jace turned his head and saw it. A tall stone structure half covered in vines. It looked like ruins of an old temple or outpost, built by someone or something. He didn't care. It had walls, shade, and maybe a safe corner to rest. They stepped inside carefully. Broken statues, moss-covered walls, and ancient symbols filled the place. There was a dry well in the center, and stone benches along the walls. It felt quiet, peaceful even. Lyra sank to the ground, eyes closing fast. Jace checked every room, making sure no creatures were hiding. Once he was sure they were alone, he came back and made Lyra as comfortable as he could. He cleaned her wounds with water from his pack and used soft leaves to cool her fever. She muttered in her sleep, sometimes calling out names in her language. Jace didn't know what to say, so he sat beside her and whispered, "You're going to be okay." As the light faded, Jace took one last walk around the ruins. He noticed something strange: claw marks on the outer wall. Fresh ones. Something had been here recently. He returned to Lyra and sat close. He wouldn't let anything happen to her. She was the only other living soul on this planet with him, and somehow he felt responsible for her. She opened her eyes and looked at him. In a shaky voice, she said, "Safe." Jace nodded, forcing a smile. For now, but deep inside, he knew it wasn't over. This planet wasn't just wild. It was watching them, and tomorrow, the real fight for survival would begin. The planet watches. Jace woke with a jolt. The ruins were quiet, too quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. It felt wrong, like the jungle was holding its breath. He looked over at Lyra, who was still asleep but twitching. Caught in a fever dream, her breathing was fast and uneven, her skin damp with sweat. He had to find something to help her. She wouldn't last much longer. He stood, stretched his aching limbs. and grabbed the flare blade. He left the ruins. Slowly, not wanting to wake her, every step outside felt dangerous. Like he was being watched, birds no longer sang, and the rustling leaves had fallen silent. Even the bugs had disappeared. He walked toward the stream they passed earlier. He needed water and something useful: plants, roots, berries, anything that might help. As he knelt by the edge, filling his pouch, he saw something move under the water. It was fast, long, black, and snake-like. He backed away quickly, heart racing. This place didn't like visitors. He turned to leave and found footprints in the mud. Not his, and not Liera's either. These were large, wide, and had 3 sharp toes. Jace's grip tightened around the blade. Something else was out. Here, and it was close. He followed the prints for a short while, curiosity pulling him deeper into the trees. They led to a clearing, and what he saw froze him in place. A creature was hunched over a tree, its back turned to him. It looked like a massive lizard, with armored scales and long claws scraping bark from the tree. It sniffed the air and suddenly turned its head sharply. Its eyes locked onto Jace. Jace ran. Branches whipped his face, vines pulled at his arms. But he didn't stop. Behind him, the creature roared and charged through the trees. It was fast, too fast. He dove behind a fallen log, pressing himself. Flat against the dirt, the creature thundered past, sniffing the air, growling low. But it didn't see him. Minutes passed before it moved away. Jace stayed still, barely breathing. Only after silence returned did he crawl out and make his way back to the ruins. Every step felt like he was being hunted, because now he knew they weren't alone here. When he returned, Liera was sitting up, barely. She looked pale and exhausted. But her eyes lit up when she saw him. He knelt beside her, gave her water, and checked her wounds. They were turning a sickly color. He knew the infection was spreading. "Hold on, Liera," he whispered, "just a little longer." She pointed to his hand. Noticing the cuts and dirt, he gave her a weak smile. "I ran into some trouble." She didn't laugh, but she did lean. Her head on his shoulder. That small gesture said enough. Later that day, as the sun dipped low again, Jace explored the deeper parts of the ruin in a small back chamber. He found something: old storage containers made of stone and metal. Most were broken or empty, but one still had sealed herbs. They smelled bitter and strange, but Liera's eyes widened when she saw them. She nodded slowly, reached out with shaking fingers, and picked the purple leaves. She crushed them, mixed them with water, and made a thick paste. Then she spread it on her wounds. Wincing as it burned, her breathing slowed afterward, and some color returned to her skin. Jace sighed. In relief, they had a chance now, that night. He sat at the entrance again, watching the jungle. But something had changed. He noticed the trees around them now had symbols carved into the bark. Fresh ones, not ancient like the ruins. It wasn't just wild animals they had to fear. Something intelligent was out there. Liera joined him in the moonlight. Her steps slow but steadier than before. She sat beside him. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she spoke softly in her language, then pointed to the stars. He looked up with her. Above them, the sky sparkled with unfamiliar constellations. They weren't near any known system. They were alone. "Us," she said, then pointed to him. "Jace." She touched her chest. "Liera," then pointed to the dark jungle. "It watches." Jace nodded. Understanding more than her words, this planet wasn't just alive, it was aware. He looked at her and said, "Then we watch back." The ruins are not empty. Rain poured down hard the next morning. Fat drops crashed through the trees, soaking everything in seconds. The jungle came alive with color, sound, and movement. But inside the ruins, Jace and Liera sat quietly. They had made a small fire using broken wood and dry roots. Protected by a slanted stone wall, the smoke rose upward, escaping through a crack in the ceiling. It was the first time they had warmth in days. Lyra looked better. The herbs she had used were working, slowing the infection in her wounds. She still moved slowly, but her eyes were sharper now, more alert, more aware. Jay shared the last of their ration, some crushed protein bars and water from his pouch. She broke her share in two and gave half back to him. He smiled, not because of the food, but because she trusted him now. That trust meant something out here. Out here, they only had each other. When the rain stopped, the jungle steam rose like a ghost. A thick fog crept in and blanketed the ruins. The air was heavy and hard to breathe. Jay stood and stretched. Ready to explore deeper into the structure, there had to be more tools, supplies, maybe even old tech they could fix. Something useful. Stay, he told Lyra gently. She nodded and leaned back against the wall. Eyes closing, he moved through the crumbling hallways. Every step echoing through the stone, carvings lined the walls, pictures of strange creatures, planets, stars, and battles. It told a story, but one he couldn't fully understand, still. It gave him the feeling that others had been here before. A long, long time ago, as he turned a corner. He heard a soft clicking sound, not from the jungle. From inside the ruins, he froze. The sound came again. Closer. This time click, click, scrape. Something was moving just out of sight. Slowly, he stepped forward, flare blade ready in hand. He turned the corner and stopped cold. It wasn't an animal, it was a machine. A tall or spider-like robot with long metal legs and glowing eyes stood in the center of the room. It was covered in moss and dust, like it hadn't moved in years, but its head turned slightly. Clicking in Jace's direction, its scanners locked onto him. Jace didn't move. He didn't breathe. The robot spoke in a sharp, broken voice. Identify. Purpose. Entry unauthorized. Jace raised his hand slowly. Crash, survivor. Not enemy. The robot paused, processing his voice. Its head tilted, then repeated. Crash. Survivor. Query accepted. Status neutral. The robot lowered its stance. No longer aggressive, Jace let out a breath. He took a careful step. Closer. Can you help? We need food, tools, medicine. The robot scanned him from head to toe, then responded. Supplies. Limited. Function restricted. Power core damaged. Jace sighed. Figures still. The robot turned and led him to another chamber. Inside were sealed boxes, old but intact. Jace opened them and found wrapped food, solar blankets, and strange metal rods with glowing ends. He grabbed everything he could carry and nodded. Thank you. The robot clicked again. Danger. Nearby. Movement detected. Northwest sector. Jace tensed. Something's coming. Unknown presence. 3 life forms. Approaching ruins. Jace didn't wait. He ran back through the halls, the supplies bouncing in his arms. When he reached Lyra, she was already standing, weak but alert. Her hand gripping a sharp piece of stone like a dagger. He dropped the gear beside her. Visitors. Not friendly. Together, they dragged the supplies into the darkest part of the ruin. Jace wrapped a thermal blanket around Lyra and pressed her behind a fallen statue. Then he crouched beside her. Blade in hand, heart pounding. Minutes later, they heard footsteps, not animals too careful, too coordinated. Voices echoed, sharp and cold, speaking a language Jace didn't know. Lyra's face went pale, her body stiff. She whispered, "Hunters." Jace had no time to ask more. Figures moved into view, tall aliens in dark armor, their helmets shaped like skulls. They carried spears and strange rifles, scanning every corner of the ruin. They're tracking us. Jace said softly. Lyra nodded. They kill survivors. Steal tech, burn the rest. Jace's grip tightened on his blade. He looked at Lyra and whispered, "We don't run." Not this time. And as the hunters stepped closer, Jace rose slowly from behind the stone. The hunters bleed. Jace stood slowly, arms raised, eyes locked on the armored hunters. His heart beat so loud he could barely hear the jungle behind him. There were 3 of them, tall, armored from head to toe, their weapons glowing with red heat. They weren't scavengers. They were executioners. One hunter barked something in their language and pointed the weapon at him. Jace didn't move, didn't blink from the corner of his eye. He saw Lyra hidden behind the broken statue, her fingers gripping the stone blade she had made. She was weak, but ready. The hunter stepped forward and shoved Jace with the end of the spear. Jace stumbled back, but kept his balance. He said, "We crashed." "We're not enemies, of course." They didn't understand him. Another hunter stepped around. Scanning the supplies Jace had gathered, they pointed at the herbs, the food, and one of the metal rods glowing faintly. Then they looked at each other and laughed in a low, sharp tone. Jace realized what they were going to do: take the gear, kill him, and leave Lyra behind. If they found her, they'd kill her too, or worse. The lead hunter raised his rifle. That's when Lyra screamed. It was a loud, raw sound full of anger and pain. She leaped from her hiding place and threw the sharp stone like a dagger. It struck one hunter in the side of the neck, right between the armor plates. Blood sprayed, black and thick. The hunter fell back with a choking sound. Jace didn't wait. He charged the second one and slammed the flare blade into the chest. It sparked against the armor, but didn't pierce. The hunter knocked him back with a metal fist, sending him crashing into the stone wall. Lyra lunged at the last one, but she was too slow. He grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. Jace roared and threw himself at the hunters, legs tackling him to the floor. Lyra dropped, coughing and gasping for air. The hunter rolled and drew a knife, slashing toward Jace's face. Jace grabbed the hunter's wrist with both hands and pushed, inch by inch. Fighting the blade, it was close to close. Then Lyra, still coughing, grabbed a fallen spear and drove it through the hunter's side. He screamed and thrashed, but the weapon went deep. Jace twisted the knife out of the hunter's hand and slammed it into the neck joint. The hunter stopped moving. Blood ran across the stone floor, heavy, silent. Jace stood up slowly, breathing hard, face covered in sweat and dirt. He looked at Lyra. She was shaking, bruised, and pale, but her eyes were burning with fire. The last hunter was still alive, crawling away. Lyra stepped forward and took the dropped rifle. She didn't hesitate. One shot ended him. Silence returned. Only the sound of the wind outside and the crackle of their dying fire. Jace leaned against the wall and wiped his face. His body ached, his arms trembled, but he was alive, and so was she. He looked at the 3 bodies. Who were they? Lyra answered in her soft voice. Collectors. They take survivors, take tech, leave nothing. She looked down, eyes cold. They took my sister once. Jace understood then this fight wasn't just about survival. It was personal. They took what they could from the dead hunter's energy. Cells, working knives, small healing kits. One of the rifles still worked. Jace handed it to Lyra. You know how to use this. She gave a weak smile. Yes, that night they didn't sleep. They sat side by side, weapons nearby, fire crackling low. Lyra cleaned her wounds using the medkit, while Jace wrapped his bruised ribs. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Something had changed between them, not just trust, something deeper: shared blood, shared fight, shared pain. As the stars rose above the jungle, Jace looked up and whispered, "If this planet wants to kill us, it better try harder." Lyra looked at him, smiled faintly, and said, "We don't die easy." In that moment, they were no longer just survivors. They were warriors. Together, secrets beneath a stone. The next morning, Jace woke with sore muscles and a stiff back. The fire had died out during the night, and mist curled through the ruins like soft fingers. He sat up and checked Lirashi was still asleep, her face calm for the first time in days. Her color was better now, and her breathing steady. For once, she looked at peace. Jace stood, stretched his bruised limbs, and moved quietly through the ruins. The bodies of the hunters were gone, dragged outside during the night. He had burned them far from the structure. Just in case others were tracking their signal, this planet had no mercy. He wasn't about to give it any weakness to use against them. He walked toward the back of the ruins. There was one area he hadn't explored, the old sealed chamber near the carvings. The stone door had been half buried in vines and roots, too heavy to open before, but now he had tools and he had strength. And more importantly, he had a reason. He used a spear tip to pry loose the stone vines. Then a hunter's rifle, but to break the ancient lock. It cracked open with a deep rumble, sending dust and stale air rolling out like smoke. Jace covered his nose and stepped inside. The room was large, round, and lined with glowing lines etched into the walls. A soft blue light pulsed through the carvings like veins. In the center was a platform raised, metallic, and untouched by time. It looked like a control console of some kind. With buttons and panels lit faintly, Jace blinked. In surprise, "Tech," he whispered. "Real tech." He approached slowly, scanning every detail. The console had a circular pad that hummed gently, like it was still alive. Beside it was a cracked screen, flickering with strange symbols he didn't recognize. Suddenly, it beeped and lit up brighter. Jace jumped back, weapon ready, but nothing. Attacked. The console simply spoke in Lyra's language. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was asking something, a request, maybe a question. He ran back to get Lyra. She was already awake, sitting up with her, blanket wrapped tightly around her. When he told her what he found, her eyes widened. Ancient place. From before war, she said softly, "You found it." Together, they returned to the sealed room. When Lyra stepped inside, the lights grew brighter. The console beeped again, this time with clearer voice commands. She approached slowly, her fingers shaking slightly. She placed her hand on the pad. The console scanned her palm, then unlocked a hidden panel. A smooth sphere rose from the center of the machine, glowing blue and green. Lyra gasped. "Star core fragment." Jace blinked. "What's that?" She looked at him, her voice serious. "It powers ships, gates, cities." Her hand trembled. "We could call help or escape if we use it," but the joy didn't last long. The console gave another sound, this one sharper, deeper. Lyra's face fell. "It says, danger." Signal already sent. Jace's eyes narrowed. "Someone else knows we're here." They backed away from the console and closed the door behind them. It couldn't be destroyed, but it could be hidden again. Whatever signal it sent might bring enemies, or worse, others like the hunters. But smarter, faster, crueler. Jace and Lyra gathered their supplies quickly. They packed food, tools, weapons, and the glowing sphere inside a metal case. They couldn't stay in the ruins. The place had served them well, but now it was a beacon. Before they left, Jace carved a symbol into the outer wall. Simple sign in human language. "Still alive?" Then he looked at Lyra and asked, "Where do we go now?" She thought for a moment, then pointed north. "Mountains. Old relay station. We send real message from there." Jace nodded. "Then we move fast." The jungle didn't welcome them. Every step forward was a battle against mud, vines, and roots. The animals watched from high branches, some with glowing eyes, others silent. And still, the air smelled thick with danger, and every shadow felt like a trap as night fell. They reached a ridge that overlooked a deep valley. And there in the far distance stood the mountain range, high, dark, and covered in clouds. Jace sighed. That's far. Lyra simply said, we don't stop. They camped under a fallen tree that night. The star core between them glowing gently, like a heart pulsing in the dark. Jace watched it, thinking about Earth, about his old life, about how a crash and an alien girl had changed everything. He looked at Lyra, sleeping beside him, rifle in hand. He whispered, we'll get out of this, I promise, but far behind. Them, in the jungle shadows, something else had received the signal, and it was already moving toward them. Last stand before the stars, the wind howled across the ridge. Dark clouds moved fast over the mountains. Jace stood at the edge, scanning the jungle behind them with his scope. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew they were being followed. Not by animals, not by simple hunters, something more. Lyra packed their gear in silence, her eyes sharp and focused. She could feel it too. Something was moving, getting closer each day. The forest had grown quiet again. Too quiet. By nightfall, they set up camp in a narrow valley between two cliffs. It was rocky and hard to reach, giving them some safety. But even there, Jace placed traps and tripwires using vines and parts from the hunter rifles. He wasn't going to be caught off guard again as they ate their last food rations. Lyra spoke. I saw the creature. In dream. Tall. Not machine, not beast. Jace looked at her. You think it's real? She nodded. It hunts the core. She pointed to the metal case between them. Glowing faintly through the cracks, it wakes things that should sleep. Jace didn't sleep that night. He sat with his rifle across his knees. Blade beside him, the fire crackled low, and Lyra lay under a blanket. Whispering softly in her sleep, he watched the stars above. They felt so close, yet so unreachable. Then the trap snapped. Something was here. Jace jumped to his feet, rifle aimed. Lyra was already awake, blade in hand, crouched low like a shadow. They waited, breath frozen. The jungle was silent, too silent. Then it stepped into view. It was taller than any hunter, wrapped in shadow and armor made of bone and black steel. Its face was hidden behind a cracked mask, but its glowing eyes burned red. It made no sound, no growl, no hiss. It simply stared. Then it raised one long arm and pointed at them. Jace didn't wait. He fired the blast, struck the figure. But it didn't fall. It staggered back, then kept walking. Lyra tossed a spear, hitting the shoulder. Still nothing. Run! Jace shouted, pulling her hand. They moved fast through the rocks. Climbing upward toward the cliffs, the monster followed. Slowly, but it didn't stop. Jace turned and fired again. This time, aiming for its legs. The shot hit, and sparks flew. The figure stumbled on. That gave them time. At the top of the cliff, the relay station came into view, half buried in stone and moss, but still standing. Lyra rushed to the door and slammed her hand against the control panel. Didn't open. Jace looked back. The shadow was climbing the cliff now, each step slow, patient, deadly. Lyra cried out, "It won't open." Jace ran over and dropped the metal case, pulling out the glowing core the moment he placed it in the socket beside the door. The machine came to life. Lights flared. The door opened with a hiss. Go. He shouted. They ran inside, and the door sealed behind them just as the figure reached the top. But it didn't attack the door. It simply stood there, watching, waiting, inside. The station was cold and filled with dust, but the core's power lit up the walls, bringing old machines online. Lyra rushed to the main console and began working fast. Jace stood guard, rifle ready, eyes on the door. Can you send a signal? He asked. Lyra nodded, fingers flying over the controls. Old code. May take time. Jace paced the room, the silence pressing on him. Then the wall screen blinked, showing the figure still standing outside, unmoving, but not gone. Lyra looked. Up. Signal sent. She stepped away from the console, her hands shaking. Someone. Will here Jace stared at her. Then at the screen. We can't wait, he said. We end this. He opened the door, rifle in hand. The figure stepped inside without a sound. Jace didn't speak. He aimed and fired. Shot after shot. The bullets slowed the figure, but didn't kill it. Lyra joined him, blade in one hand, spear in the other. Together they pushed the monster back toward the edge of the cliff. Jace yelled, "Now!" Lyra swept its legs while Jace slammed the spear into its chest. It staggered back and fell. It didn't scream. It didn't fight. It simply dropped into the darkness below. Swallowed by the planet, the air was still again. The station hummed. Quietly behind them, above, the sky flickered one star, blinking brighter than the rest. A ship rescue. Jace turned to Lyra, breathless, covered in blood and dust. We made it, she nodded. Her voice quiet, together, as the rescue beacon activated fully. Jace looked out over the jungle. It had tried to break them, but it had failed. This planet had tested them, but they had survived. Together, and now they were going home.